All right, kids, the conclusion to Dead End in Norvelt. It's probably going to be a longer video than usual. 40 pages, which might take like 30 minutes. So, here we go. Chapter 26. On Sunday after church, I made an appointment with Miss Volker to fix the leaky side of my nose. I told Mom I had to go down to her house and help with her laundry, which was sort of true because she had trouble getting the washing machine started, and she definitely couldn't pin her clothes onto the outside lines to dry. When I arrived at her house, I quickly went into the basement to get a load of sheets going. When I turned on the light, I saw that Miss Volker had put out more chocolate sprinkled with 1080. There were a few dead mice scattered around, which only reminded me of the dead old ladies. I tried not to look at their tortured little bodies as I filled the washing machine, added the soap, and got it started. I dashed up the stairs as quickly as I could and went into the kitchen. "Would you like some cookies before your operation?" she cheerfully asked, and nodded toward where she had a package of them spread out across the kitchen counter. They were the same cookies she packaged up for the old ladies. No thanks," I said hesitantly. Mushrooms, casseroles, chocolates, and cookies were suddenly off my food list. "It's always good to have a little something in your stomach before an operation," she suggested. It's actually not true. They always say don't eat 24 hours before your operation. Anyway, how about just one little cookie to help settle you down? "I'm just eager to get this over with," I replied. I went to her linen closet and got a sheet for the kitchen table. Then I gathered up her special tools. She got her bucket of paraffin heated and dunked her hands into the hot wax while I numbed my nose with the anesthetic. Once she got her fingers moving, she peeled off the wax, then grabbed the cauterizing instrument and held the sharp tip of it under the flame until it turned a painful shape of bright red. "Now," she said, pivoting quickly from the stove and staring as she pointed the menacing wire toward my nose. "Let's get this done once and for all." "Are you sure?" I asked in a small voice. "You know I don't like to be questioned," she said sternly. "Okay, do it, but don't make it painful," I begged and gritted my teeth. She looked like she had just one purpose on her mind as she aimed for the dark cave of my left nostril. Maybe she knew I thought she could have poisoned those ladies, and now she had me pinned to the table, and she was planning to jab that sizzling hot blade and wire right up into the caramel center of my brain. I'd be dead in an instant, and all she would have to say is that I sneezed and jerked my head forward and impaled myself on the wire. I didn't know what to do, so I said nothing. She peeked up my nose, and then, as steadily as she could, she inserted the tiny blade. I felt the fierce heat inside my nostril and knew that with one false move, one little hiccup, and then the phone rang. "Don't bat an eyelash," she whispered, and carefully lifted my hand to the wood handle of wire and blade. "Just hold it right there. I'll be quick." "But..." "Hush," she snapped and turned toward the telephone, "or your hand will move and you'll deform yourself." She had enough flexibility in her hot fingers to pick up the receiver. "Miss Volker here," she announced. "Make it snappy. I'm in the middle of a nose job." Someone said something to her. "Okay," she said hastily, "I'll be right there." "No problem. My driver is with me now." Just then I had to sneeze. "My nose," I wailed. "Hurry." "Don't jerk your hand," she hollered from the phone. But it was too late. I sneezed and scraped the blade and wire against the inside of my nose as I yanked it out. "Bless you," she said. "I think I sliced my nose off," I cried. "I'll be a freak on one side of my face and I'll have to walk around in profile like an Egyptian drawing for the rest of my life." "Relax," she said, standing over me. "It's just a small burn blister at the tip of your nose." Then, with her other hand, she shined a flashlight up the nostril. "Hey, not bad," she concluded. "Not bad at all. Looks like that sneeze helped you cauterize the rest of the capillaries. You might make a good doctor someday." I sat up. I still couldn't feel my face. "You didn't stick a pin in my nose that time, did you?" I asked. No, she said impatiently. Now let's get going. I just found out Mrs. Drugi will no longer be sharing air with us on this planet. We left the house so quickly, she didn't see the box of chocolates and notes sitting outside by the porch door. It wasn't there when I arrived this morning, so Mr. Spiz must have sneaked over while I was on the operating table. As usual, I drove, and she talked. Well, this is a day I've been waiting for a long time, Miss Volker said, and sighed as if a great weight was off her chest. Now it will all come down to me and him. We are the last two Norvelters standing. Are you going to have a shootout at high noon, I asked. That's not how I operate, she replied. He'll never see me coming. But Mr. Spiz did see us coming. When we pulled into Mrs. Drugi's driveway, he was sitting on his tricycle with a superior smirk on his face, as if he just won a super tricycle road race. Behind him were two county troopers standing in front of the doorway, and they had their thumbs hooked into their pants pockets. With their puffed out chests and thick necks, they looked like owls rotating their carved faces back and forth. Off to one side, Mr. Huffer stood next to a twiggy, water-starved azalea and posed like his usual wilted teapot self. When Miss Volker stepped out of the car, they all stared at her, but she was accustomed to being the center of attention. Gentlemen, she announced to the troopers, this is my jurisdiction, and I'll take charge of the examination. They nodded, and quietly, the five of them filed into the house. I lagged behind and stood in the doorway. Mr. Huffer and Mrs. Drugi laid out on the couch in the living room where she had died while watching TV after dinner. As soon as I caught sight of the body, I hopped back and gazed off to one side, but I could still hear. Mr. Huffer pulled the sheet back from Mrs. Drugi's heavy body. No unusual marks on her face, Miss Volker announced. Other than the bruise from where she fell from the couch to the floor, her belly's not swollen, her legs are contorted, but that is just the rigor mortis having set in. I knew Miss Volker's hands must have cooled down and would be seizing up, but she just took a deep breath and proved to the police that she could complete a thorough job. Miss Volker went over to Mrs. Drugi from top to bottom. I heard Mr. Huffer pull the sheet back up over her, so I stuck my head around the corner. Miss Volker stood up and looked at Mr. Huffer and the unblinking troopers and Mr. Spiz. It is death from natural causes, she said with confidence, all very routine. Looks to me like it was a stroke, given the burst capillaries in her eyes. Her gums are badly infected too, and often that infection spreads to the heart, so it's possible she had a heart attack. She had high blood pressure, minor diabetes issues, and if you look at her foot, you'll see that one shoe is partially cut open across the side because she had gout in her foot, and the only way she could get her shoe on was to split the side to accommodate the swelling, gentlemen, she said, summing up her case. What you see before you is the result of 83 years of growing old. It was a top-notch examination. She showed off all her skills and perceptions, and I was very proud of her. It went well until she turned to Mr. Huffer and asked, cremation as usual? That was when the two troopers stepped forward and one of them said, we have an order to take charge of the body and send it to the lab for a full autopsy. After that, we'll release it to Mr. Huffer. Suit yourself, Miss Volker said, but you're wasting your time and taxpayer money. Then she turned on one heel and marched out the front door with me right behind. She was quiet in the car except to point out, the dear lady died on a day with some great history. August 12th is the day on which we remember the death of Antony and Cleopatra 2,000 years ago. I knew she was the last Egyptian pharaoh and died from a snake bite, I said, poisoned by asps. But how'd her boyfriend go? Self-inflicted wound, she recalled without sympathy. He and another Roman general, Octavian, were fighting over who would rule the Roman Empire. Once Octavian had conquered Antony and Cleopatra's army, someone told Antony that Cleopatra had been killed during the battle. In grief, Antony fell on his sword, but did a crummy job of killing himself, so he was very slow about dying. However, Cleopatra wasn't dead. She was hiding in a little fortress palace, and when she heard about Antony, she had him brought to her. He moaned and groaned and whined and cried, and after he finally died, she allowed the asps to bite her on the chest with their deadly poison. Romantic, I said. Wow, now that's the way to go. Not romantic, she disagreed. To me, it would be romantic if Antony properly fell on his sword and kicked the bucket and Cleopatra escaped and lived a lovely life, sailing along the Nile without him and his big ideas ruining her kingdom. She was better off without him. I knew what she was getting at. It was time for Spiz to fall off his tricycle and onto his sword and leave her alone to live the new life she wanted in Florida with her sister. But I didn't think Spiz was going to just fall on his sword. When we returned to Miss Volker's home, I sat down at my desk. As I had all summer, I raised my pencil, and Miss Volker fell back into an easy chair. Mrs. Drugy, she started up, and already her voice sounded tired, like a cold engine that didn't want to turn over. She paused and took a deep breath and began again. And this time, her engine sputtered to life. Mrs. Drugy was a lovely woman and lived a long and satisfying life. She loved her family, her community, and her country, and in return, she was loved and respected by all who knew her. As a child, she was a violin prodigy who, at the age of 11, played with the New York Philharmonic. She went on to perform with the world's greatest symphonies, but by the age of 23, she set down the violin and never picked it up again. When asked why she quit, she replied that one day she realized she was only playing to please her parents and that she really did not enjoy it. Instead, she retreated to Norvelt, where she married Mr. Drugy, who was better known as a clown at children's birthday parties and was famous for his sense of humor. And Mrs. Drugy became famous for her laughter. They were a perfect couple. I waited for Miss Volker to continue, but she had run out of gas and slumped back into her chair. That's all I have to say, she said. Mrs. Drugy was a lovely woman who proved that you don't have to do what your parents want or what your boyfriend wants for you to be happy. You just have to be yourself, for there is no greater love than self-love. I'll type this up, I said dutifully, and then I asked something that had been on my mind for a long time. Miss Volker, now that all the original Norvelters are dead, doesn't that mean you have to marry Mr. Spiz like you promised him? I've been thinking about that, she replied with a wry smile, and I realized that I failed to inform that bonehead of one key fact. I'm an original Norvelter too. So I guess I'll just have to wait until I drop dead to marry me. Like I said, his alphabet soup only spells out D-U-M-B. Well, I don't think he'll be very happy about that, I said, because he already left you a little gift by the back door. Instantly, her face stiffened. Go get it for me, she snarled. She looked even more tired. I expected some more mouse bait. I went out to the porch and retrieved the box of chocolates and the note and brought them to the living room. Read the note, she instructed. I pulled the tape off the package and opened the envelope. As God intended, it is just the two of us left in this Garden of Eden. Marry me. Spiz. There was a knock at the door. To quote Cleopatra, Miss Volker sang out, "The enemy is at the gate. Believe me, if I had a snake, I'd use it on him. Now go answer it." It was Spiz. "Gantos, boy," he bellowed. "Figures you'd be here." He stared down at me as if I were a piece of gum he might scrape up. "I was just leaving," I said to him and stepped onto the porch. I hadn't gone far when I heard his foghorn voice holler out, "Hello, good looking. Looks like we're the last two lovebirds at the party." I knew she was about to give him a piece of her mind, and I didn't want to hear it. I had heard enough already. I took the obituary down to Mr. Green. He was wiping ink off his hands with a rag. "I told you there was something suspicious going on," Mr. Green said, feeling pretty proud of himself and puffing up a noxious cloud of cherry tobacco smoke, which burned my eyes. "We'll know soon enough if someone has been killing these old ladies. Or not," I added. "How much do you want to bet?" I say that Miss Volker killed them, he declared as he pulled out his wallet. I pulled out my $2 bill. I say she didn't, I replied. He took my money and his and put them in a desk drawer. Winner takes it all, he said, puffing excitedly. Takes all, I repeated, then walked it straight home. I was exhausted. I didn't know what to do, but tried to distract myself by reading while I waited for the autopsy report. I looked over all my books, but every one of the histories reminded me of Miss Volker. The Crusades, the Magna Carta, the FBI, Women of Courage, Custer's Last Stand. I could just hear her voice behind each book, linking the past to the present and the present to the future. But what was her future? That question was why I could not read a word, because I was looking out my window and toward her house and trying to read her mind. I wanted to sneak back down there and snoop, but I was still grounded. Police cars had been coming and going. Spiz's tricycle was parked by her back porch. Men had been carrying boxes and bags out of her house and loading them into trucks and driving off. Mom would not let me call her, so my only hope was that Miss Volker would call me, and so I waited. When the phone rang, I ran for it and picked up the receiver. "I'll be right there," I cried out to Miss Volker. Only it was Mr. Spiz. "Gantos boy," he hollered so loudly I could smell his breath through the phone. "I got some bad news for you." "Is it about Miss Volker?" I asked nervously. "Is she okay?" "She asked me to call you and let you know that the police have arrested her for murder. They say she killed all those old ladies." "She did not," I shouted. "How could she have done it?" "Poisoned them," he said slowly, heartlessly. "That cannot be true," I stated. "Mrs. Drugi was full of poison. The police have proof it was your girlfriend who did it," he said quickly. "What proof?" I shot back. "They found 1080 all over the chocolates at Miss Volker's house," he barked. "She must have been giving them to the old ladies." "She was poisoning the mice in her basement with the chocolates you gave her," I shot back. "She hated those crummy chocolates. She gave the old ladies Thin Mints." "Don't be a smart aleck. They found 1080 and Thin Mints too," he snarled. "So what? A lot of people use 1080, I said as calmly as possible. "That doesn't mean anything. You use it, and Mr. Huffer uses it." "We use it for pests," he said, getting wound up, "not for people. We don't cook with it or sprinkle it on cookies or serve it on chocolates." "Maybe it was the Hells Angels," I suggested. "Miss Volker said they brought a curse on the town. That phony curse was just a way of covering her tracks in advance of murdering those ladies herself. Believe me, I know how she operates. She says one thing when she means another." "I guess that means she won't marry you," I surmised. "Even though she said she would." "I'm the one asking the questions," he said in a steely voice. "Did you help her? She can't use her hands, so she must have had a murder accomplice." "I didn't do a thing," I said, standing up to him. "I don't even believe she did it." "Well, the police might want to talk to you next," he said, "so you better get your story straight and tell the truth." "Then I can tell you that you were the last person to touch the food before serving it to the old ladies," I reminded him. "You probably murdered them." "I'm a police officer," he said with authority. "I don't think it's a good idea to accuse me of murder." "You made me buy the 1080, I said. "The police were informed that you bought it for Miss Volker," he said smoothly. "They found it at her house." "Anything else you lied about?" I asked. "Only you would know if someone was lying," he boomed out. "The police are with her now. They put her under house arrest, and I have to stand guard." "You better not hurt her," I warned. "She's old." "She may be old, but she's a cold-blooded killer," he howled and hung up. I went back to my room and sulked a little bit as I looked over my collection of obituaries. It seemed impossible for someone like Miss Volker, who loved people, to turn around and hurt them. And I felt pretty rotten for thinking that she might have wanted to kill me too. After a while, Dad walked in and put his hand on my shoulder. I just heard about Miss Volker, he said, and shook his head at the mystery of it. And I know you are worried about her, so I'll give you something to take your mind off her. I'm going to fly to Florida in a few days to look for work. I was going to stay and move more empty Norvelt houses to West Virginia, but now the police want to keep them here while they investigate the old lady's deaths. So we can't even sell our house. This is a good time for me to go, and you can keep busy by helping your mom out. Am I still grounded? I asked. Once I'm gone, she'll need you to run errands and stuff, he said. I figure she'll let you off the hook. Well, what about the flight, my flight in the J3 I won? You promised to take me up. I thought you turned that ticket in to go playing baseball, he replied. Huh. I did, but can't we do it in secret, I begged, when she's not looking? Okay, he figured, but we'll have to find a time real soon. And we can't take off from the house because she'll spot us and then we'll both get into even more trouble. I can sneak away and meet you in the field, I suggested. He nodded, yeah, he said, and smiled secretly at some crazy thought he had. That'll work for me. Okay, so that was just chapter 26. And because I'm at 21 minutes, I'm going to stop it and then just do another video right now so that uploading won't take forever like last night's. But there are only 2 chapters left, so I'll pause now.